Hello, this is Craig Wesco recording for TCGplayer.com, and today we're going to be playing a blue-white, what's known as Spooky Taxes, or just blue-white Death and Taxes in Modern. This is the deck I played at the Magic Online Championship, I guess the kind of online World Championship, and I got ninth place with it. The deck is pretty sweet. I did a lot of testing in Modern leading up to the tournament, and I felt like that this deck is pretty well positioned, especially for a more general metagame. That tournament was a little unique, where a few people played Jund instead of Tron, and that just like really skewed the metagame. Tron is actually our best matchup, and unfortunately, zero people showed up, which is probably not going to happen at a Grand Prix or at your local metagame, unless just no Tron players, then maybe this isn't the right deck. But anyway, so I wrote an article about it with a sideboard guide and stuff like that a couple weeks ago, so check that out if you haven't already. I had a lot of requests for making some videos with it, so that's what we're doing here today. So I made a few changes to the deck, trying some things out. I went up on Mirran Crusader to 4, because I feel like Jund is just that big of a deck right now. I cut the third Geist of Saint Traft and then the fourth one out of the sideboard because in the Magic Online metagame, I expected a ton of Jace the Mind Sculptor control decks, given who was playing in the tournament. I don't expect as many of those at a Grand Prix, so I figured I can cut a couple of those. And I wanted to add Selfless Spirit, because Selfless Spirit works great with Mirran Crusader, protecting it from removal spells like Lightning Bolt. So against Jund, their only answer to Mirran Crusader is Lightning Bolt. So if we have the Queller to protect the Crusader from the Lightning Bolt, then they have a really difficult time beating through a Crusader. And then it also complements our sideboard plan really well in other matchups. So Hollow One, for instance, is a deck that's getting more and more popular, and a really good sideboard plan against Hollow One is to bring in Rest in Peace and Wrath effects. And if we bring in Wrath effects, then Selfless Spirit can protect all of our creatures from the Wrath. So you don't have to get into one of those awkward stalemates where it's like, well, I'm not going to play my creatures because then I want you to overextend into the Wrath. Like, well, you're not playing your creatures, you have Wrath, so I'm just not going to overextend into it. Now it's like just playing that really awkward game. But here we could just play out all our creatures, and as long as one of them's a Selfless Spirit, we sack Selfless Spirit and Wrath of God, and it's just one-sided. So went up to 4 Selfless Spirit. I could see playing only 3 of them and instead playing like an Honor of the Pure or another Geist of Saint Traft, something like that. But I just went ahead and played all 4, see how it goes. So the basic idea of the deck, you want to play turn 1 Ether Vial if possible. Backup plan is turn 1 Serum Visions. And the Serum Visions is there to help find our premier turn 2 plays, which are Lunan Arbiter or Thalia. If we're on the play, it's generally Arbiter. If we're on the draw, sometimes it's Thalia. And then we want to set up for our next play, which Crusader or Spell Queller. And then the Restoration Angel is just kind of another way to gain some value with protecting our creatures, playing a creature at flash speed. A lot of times we want to leave up mana for Spell Queller, and if they don't cast a spell, we could just cast Restoration Angel instead. And if they cast a removal spell, then we can use Restoration Angel to blink our creature. Works really well with Geist of Saint Traft, because you can attack with Geist of Saint Traft, and then if they block Geist, then you can just Restoration Angel, blink the Geist. You got 4 points of damage in with the Angel token. Then the following turn you attack again, and you get 4 points from the Angel token, 3 points from the Restoration Angel, so that's 7. So you just get all this damage in with the Geist. Or what happens a lot of times against like a Tarmogoyf deck is you attack with your Mirran Crusader, get in 4 points of damage, then they try to attack back with their Tarmogoyf, and you play Restoration Angel and blink the Crusader, basically just to untap it to be able to block the Tarmogoyf because it's pro green. And yeah, that works out in a lot of situations. And so basically the deck just tries to tempo the opponent, and also, in case you're not familiar with Death and Taxes at all, Arbiter Ghost Quarter is kind of the combo to mana screw the opponent, or Path to Exile with Arbiter means it's basically just Swords to Plowshares, just no drawback. They don't get to search. The mana in the deck is pretty good. Usually you have 4 Coast, 4 Fountain, 4 Adarkar, and an Island, so you have 13 blue sources. In the championship, I played a 4th Canopy over the 4th Adarkar, so I felt like 12 blue was sufficient, and I think it is. But I mean, it's close. Like the 4th Adarkar and the 4th Canopy are probably the closest decision in the deck, and I could see arguments either way. If you only own 3 Canopy, that is a good enough reason to only run 3 of those. But if you have 4, probably just run the 4th over the 4th Adarkar. Now the sideboard, you have 3 Forge Tender, which I think is one of the best cards you can be playing in this style of deck, because it's great against burn. You just play it turn 1 and just block all day, and then whenever they play their Searing Blaze, you just counter the Searing Blaze with it. And then against decks that have cards like Anger of the Gods, which is really good against us, you can just sack the Forge Tender to counter it. And then with Bloodbraid Elf being as big as it is right now, you can just block Bloodbraid Elf all day, and you can protect your Crusader from Lightning Bolt. So now against the Jund deck, you have this creature that just does a perfectly acceptable job of blocking Bloodbraid Elf. Also can protect any of our creatures from Lightning Bolt, including Spell Queller. But then also, now Mirran Crusader, with 4 Mirran Crusaders, which can't be blocked by anything in their deck, and can't be removed by anything other than Lightning Bolt, we have 4 Crusader, and then we have 4 Selfless Spirit, and 3 Forge Tender to protect it from the 4 Lightning Bolts in their deck. So we basically have 7 ways to protect our 4 Crusaders from their 4 Lightning Bolts post board. So we're almost always going to have an active Crusader that's alive, and that's really difficult for them to beat. So basically their cards have to really line up the right way, where they have to like play the discard spell on our Crusader, and then they have to, I don't know, it's just like, that's our plan against them. So Forge Tender, really good against Jund, really good against Anger of the Gods, really good against any of the Lightning Bolt decks. We have Rest in Peace, 3 of those, really good against all the graveyard decks, really good against Mardu, really good against Hollow One, really good against obviously Dredge, but then also I boarded in some copies, probably like 2 against the Tarmogoyf decks, including Jund, because you don't want to just flood out with them, but it's more than just a value card. Like, it is a value card, but it's like it turns off all of their important cards, like Tarmogoyfs and stuff like that. And so I'll bring those in against any graveyard decks. And then we have Stony Silence, excellent against Tron, Lantern, Affinity, Crackland Ironworks deck. And then sometimes what I'll do, generally when you bring in Stony, you board out the Vial, because that's a Nambo. Generally what I'll do against decks like Humans or Merfolk, where they're more reliant on the Vial than I am, I'll just board out the Vials and bring in the Stonies against them too. And it kind of depends if you're on the player of the draw and how other things line up, but you can do that sometimes. And then the Surgical Extractions can come in against the graveyard decks. So it's just like between Rest in Peace and Surgicals, we have a ton of graveyard hate against decks where we want a ton of graveyard hate, like against Dredge especially. But also with it might seem like a Nambo to have Rest in Peace and Surgical, because like, what if I draw Surgical when I already have Rest in Peace in play? Well, in the matchups where I bring in both, well, that's like an embarrassment of riches. Like, yeah, okay, Surgical did nothing because I have active Rest in Peace, but in the matchups where I bring in both, like if I have active Rest in Peace, me having a dead card that I just drew in Surgical means you probably have 7 dead cards in your hand because of Rest in Peace. You know, so like that's kind of like, okay, well, if that's the the floor, like that's the bad things when you already have active Rest in Peace. Like, okay, like I'll accept that fail case because that's not a fail case. But then other matchups where the active Rest in Peace isn't game over, then a lot of times I will not bring in the Surgicals. So some decks like Hollow One, for instance, it's difficult because you really want Rest in Peace, but if it like the Surgical is like it's not so good. Like having the Graveyard Hate isn't so good where it's just game over because they still have, they could just beat you with their Hollow Ones and stuff. So that's a matchup where sometimes I'll bring in like 1 Surgical and 3 Rest in Peace or things like that. But really, the Surgicals, they have an additional place in the sideboard other than just being Graveyard Hate, and that's to beat cards like Valakut or to take the opponent off Tron or against a combo deck where they try to fill up their graveyard with things. We can nab it. So basically, if we cast Surgical on a Valakut, for instance, we can Ghost Quarter or Field of Ruin the Valakut. So we have 5 ways to put the Valakut in the graveyard. And then once it's in the graveyard, we can Surgical it. Same thing with any Tron piece. So if we draw any land destruction spell, they can't rebuild because we can Surgical them. So you go Ghost Quarter your Tron land, and then during your draw step after you draw, Surgical that Tron land, and then basically you're off Tron for the rest of the game. And then the last sort of 3 cards on our sideboard are Wrath effects. And I varied them because of Meddling Mage. One of the matchups where we want Wraths is Humans, and Humans just won the Grand Prix. So I figure that to be back on an uptick. And so we want to have answers to those. And with the, like I was saying before, with the Selfless Spirits, we can make the Wrath of God a one-sided effect, which is really good in our deck of 25 creatures to only have the Wrath be one-sided. It also can come in against really any matchup that is trying to go wide with creatures, which I'm sure we'll see it come up in some of these games. So anyway, these are the changes that I would recommend for the metagame this weekend. If you haven't tried this deck out, I would recommend it. It's definitely the deck that I would play in a modern tournament right now. I think it's really good. It definitely requires some practice though. There's a lot of sort of intricate plays with that, knowing when to play your creatures, when to not, and when to counter things with Spell Queller and things like that. But even if you don't have a ton of experience with it, it's still a deck that's you can get some draws where it's not too hard to figure things out, and even if you figure out the second line a lot of times is still good enough. So yeah, let me show you how some games with it.